and welcome to T2RL Talks Conference Special Edition. In this short series of short podcasts, we'll be flagging up some of the issues that will be discussed at the T2RLEngage conference, which is happening in September in London. And I hope that having heard the conversation today, you'll be even more enthusiastic about signing up and in the QE2 Conference Centre in London in September. My guest today is Mike Tansey from Accenture, and we're going to talk somewhat about how we get from where we are today to where we need to be, how we move from today's technology of PSS, which on the whole is a monolithic system from a single vendor, to a world in which we might be buying components of our offer, order, settle, deliver solutions from many different vendors. So it's going to be challenging, and I can't think of anyone who is better placed to have this conversation than Mike. So hello, Mike.
Hello, Ian. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure, believe me. And I'm looking forward to the session that Accenture will be participating in at the conference. Let's just kick off by defining a couple of terms. In today's world, most airlines buy a passenger services system from a single vendor. Many of them buy from Amadeus or Sabre, but there are another 30 or so vendors in the world. In tomorrow's world, IATA's aspiration, and a lot of the airlines we talk to, is that they will be able to mix and match components from many different vendors potentially, or even some that they build themselves. Do you think that's a feasible or a sensible way to go forward?
Absolutely. I think we see from other industries and other similar platforms, most notably ERP, that the modular architecture that you describe creates great flexibility and choice for airlines to build solutions that are much more specific to their own ambitions and their own needs. Whilst there are, of course, huge similarities across every airline in the world, there are also huge differences. And the modular architecture allows those airlines to respond to their specific business needs and ambitions.
And I think that's an important point about the similarities and differences. I've always been of the opinion that the ratio of the two is probably something like 90 to 10. It may not be, it may be 75-25, I don't know. But those similarities mean that the industry badly needs robust standards for how you connect together the various components of a modular architecture. Do you think those standards are yet in place and mature?
I think they're in place, but I don't think they're mature. And I think, it's a natural evolution. I don't think we should be too concerned that there's not maturity now, because very few airlines, if any, have embarked on a meaningful advance in the offer, order, settlement, deliver world. And so everyone is on a bit of a voyage of discovery. So it's only right that there's room for those standards to mature with reality. But I do think we have a very strong foundation to move forward, and airlines should embrace what's in place now.
Okay. When it comes to standards, I always think that there are two kinds of standards. There are the what I call de jure standards, the ones that international organizations sit in rooms for months on end to produce and write down and publish. And then there are the de facto standards, where you get a dominant vendor of one component who says, okay, you want to connect to me, this is how you do it. Which is going to be more important as we go forward?
I think definitely the first set are the most important, those core standards that every airline can build around. And I don't think we should see those as restrictive. I think we should see them as I've just described, as the foundation from which to innovate. And I would hope that as the industry accelerates its adoption, that the standard development can keep pace, and that we don't sigh at the slow speed of standard evolution.
Yeah, I always feel, and cards on table here, I've only really ever worked in this industry, for 40 years or more. I always feel that our industry is more reliant on interconnections than pretty much any other industry. Am I just being parochial there with your Accenture hat on? Can you say, oh, no, 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 lots of other industries have this issue?
No, I can absolutely say that. I think what I would, my own personal experience is that almost every industry says we're special, we're different, and rightly so. There are, that's why people get passionate about their specific industry. The reality is there's a lot more commonality than people recognize.
Okay. And one of the other themes that I think we need to identify here is that as the industry moves away from processes and technologies based around P&Rs, tickets, EMDs, all of those good things that we've known and loved for years, towards this kind of retailing world of offers and orders, it isn't just the technology that has to change. Airlines have to think about the way their organizations are configured to exploit the possibilities of the new technologies.
100%. And if you were to ask me a slightly different question, which is what is the biggest impact which is not yet recognized, or I see as not being recognized, it would be exactly as you described, the impact on the operating model and the capabilities associated. At Accenture, we actually call it airline business reinvention rather than just the PSS technology migration, because we see that the impact on across the whole airline, most notably areas like the commercial organization, are immense. And traditional ways of doing pricing and revenue management and distribution are going to fundamentally change. And that means that the airline has to organize itself in a completely different way. In simple terms, we see it rotating from a vertical siloed organization into a horizontal agile organization. And that isn't just a 90-degree split. And there will be a whole host of new capabilities required and a whole host of current capabilities that will no longer be required.
Yeah, I always think of the airlines siloed organization, and you're quite right, that's a very standard description of most airlines organizations. I sometimes think that the lack of flexibility in the organization is driven from the operations side of the airline. There's stuff about operating aircraft and doing it safely and within legal constraints and so on, where you don't have a lot of flexibility. And that mindset has historically carried over into other areas of the airline's activities. How can we separate those things? How can we give the commercial organization a bit more freedom, maybe?
I think the reality is that what if I look at there's clearly, sorry, let's answer your direct point. Operating aircraft safely will always remain every airline's number one priority. But if we look at the way in which operational decisions are made today, both proactively and reactively, there's very little data analysis used in that, largely because that data is locked within the monolithic PSS systems. So moving to a modular architecture means that data can be a genuine enterprise resource, and operational decisions can start to be made with data and analytics as opposed to human experience and insight, and that's going to be the paradigm shift.
Okay, and in terms of expanding the product offerings of airlines, there's a lot of talk in the move towards offers and orders of bringing in third-party products and getting offers from vendors in other industries and into working effectively and efficiently with those other industries. Does that require organizational change as well?
Yeah, if we take the two, certainly from a third-party perspective, airlines have partnership managers now, but the commercial, if you are able to deliver a truly integrated offer proposition with a third party, the way in which you price that to the customer is going to change very differently, because in basic terms at the moment, it's a cost plus exercise. I get a cost of a flight, a cost of a hotel room, I put them together and add a bit of margin, and that's the price. Whereas the pricing of bundles is going to become a skill, just as it is in other industries, and therefore the way in which airlines partner with third parties, particularly the larger ones such as accommodation partners, is going to be very different.
And Accenture works with quite a lot of airlines. In your view, in your experience, are many airlines ready to make these kind of transitions? Either just in their mind and having the motivation to do it, or actually having the organizational capability of doing it?
I think I would sort of characterize a number of different traits at the moment. There are definitely a handful of airlines that recognize the potential of what this reinvention could bring them, but they just don't know how to start. They obviously understand the current state. They have a good understanding of the future state, but how do you move from one to the other? Recognizing the scale of change involved is very daunting and obviously can be high risk. There's another bunch of airlines that still see it as a pure technology program, and the CIO is leading a PSS migration in simple terms. Although some of those now, as they develop their thinking, suddenly realize, oh no, this is, I've got to bring the business on board here because of the scale of change. There are definitely airlines that are ready and want to push forward and see it as a huge opportunity for growth and innovation. And I think once we start to see those airlines progress, we'll start to see momentum across the rest of the industry.
And of course, the industry has just come through a very, very torrid time with COVID and all of the restrictions, and a lost 5 years of growth in the industry. So I think that's probably affected the appetite to take on radical new departures in some quarters.
It certainly has in some quarters. What I'd say about in other quarters is it has, if anything, it's emboldened their realization of the need for change, because they can't keep going the way that they're going now, and they have to be able to have much greater flexibility over their own destinies and the way in which they can respond. I mean, let's take the refund situation, Ian, as a really great example. Almost all the delays in issuing refunds to passengers was not because airlines wanted to hold on to the money; they just couldn't work it out. I mean, it took months and months. The sheer scale it took months and months, in some cases years, just to work out how much to actually owe you before I can actually pay you. And those sort of situations in the future will just not exist, and that can all be both quickly calculated and easily processed back to the customer.
Yeah, because those issues around refunds were not because the technology was lacking. It was because the fundamental way in which we construct fares and construct responsibilities and liabilities within the kind of 80-year-old ticketing systems just was not suited to a sudden requirement to do refunds across the board. It just had never been contemplated when those systems were first put in place.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, we at Accenture, we see 4 big buckets of value from airline reinvention, and I'll be sharing those at the conference in September. But one of them is simplicity, or agile and lean enterprise. And one of the big areas is what you've just described, and finance is another big area. Obviously, passenger revenue accounting will effectively disappear as a capability that's required within an airline. So driving simplicity and efficiency into the airline is certainly a big value area for every airline.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the critical factors around the move to offers and orders based technology. Thinking about that move again, one of the things that is absolutely true and I don't see any way around it, is that with 1,000 active airlines in the world, and actually we in our database track more than 1,000, this isn't going to happen overnight, and we're going to have an extended period where some of the early adopters have made the move, some of the leading airlines have moved, and a whole lot haven't. So transition is going to be a challenge probably for a decade or more.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. We see it as a 10 to 15 year industry-wide program. I'm always an optimist, Ian, and my belief is that once we start to see momentum and airlines start to see the value and the benefits of engaging on it, we'll see a snowball effect, and airlines may move faster than they think, because once we're facing the big unknown at the moment, aren't we? That's part of the challenge here, and understandably, some airlines don't want to be first; they want to be followers, which is entirely sensible.
Yeah, I've certainly heard people in airlines say that the idea of sustaining the cost of transition for a decade or more is just unacceptable, and there's got to be a way around it. But that requires boldness and creativity to find ways of cutting through some of that, and I guess that's at least in part the business that you guys are in.
Yeah, I think that we do believe that the scale of the cost of transition doesn't need to last 10 years. There needs to be capabilities, and many of those will be technology capabilities, particularly if we get down into the weeds of it, of being able to translate between an order and a PNR, so that obviously on a flight, you're likely to have passengers that are booked with a PNR from an interline airline, and many passengers that are booked using an order, and you have to be able to service the two together.
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the big problems with that, of course, is that there are some things you can put in an order that there's simply nowhere to put in a PNR. There's no way to shoehorn it into a PNR. So addressing that issue, I think, is going to be one of the biggest challenges in transition.
Yeah, it needs very careful thinking, and right at the beginning of this conversation, when we started talking about modularity, clearly the particularly the larger PSS providers of Amadeus and Sabre have got deep expertise in the understanding of that mapping process, and I expect them to have within their Nevio and Mosaic propositions that PNR order translation capability to enable that to take place.
Yeah, I'm sure you're right, and I'm sure there are people in Dallas and in the south of France who are thinking deeply about this for a good part of their working days. I'm looking forward to the conversation continuing in September at Engage. Certainly looking forward to seeing you there and seeing people from all kinds of airlines there to bring their perspective on some of these challenges. It's going to be a pretty exciting event, certainly from my perspective, and as I say, I'm looking forward to it, and I'd just like to thank you for Accenture's participation, and I look forward to your panel, which I think is on the second day of the conference, when we can explore some of these issues a bit further. In the meantime, I'd just like to remind everybody that if you're an airline, registration for the conference is complimentary. That means free. If you're not an airline, we will ask you to make a small contribution, of course. And I hope to see as many of the listeners to this recording as possible at the QE2 Centre in September in London. And with that, we'll sign off from this edition of T2RL Talks and say see you next month.